Hey guys, yesterday I finished Expedition 33, and I've given some time to process it, and I wanted to make a bit of a review here for you guys. This is going to be quite extensive and very certainly controversial, but I wanted to kind of unfiltered share my opinions on the game and why, to me, it's not a 10 out of 10, and to me it's not my game of the year. But I certainly don't want that to diminish Sandful Interactive's work, and I would love nothing more than to see them make more games in the future. So, before we jump into that, let me say a few things. Number one, nothing I say here should diminish your enjoyment of the game. If this is your game of the year, if this is your 11 out of 10 masterpiece, I'm really happy that you found it, and I really hope you continue to enjoy it. Again, this is still a good game, but I have some major problems with it, especially its story. Number two, there's going to be major spoilers. So if you are not finished with the game or you don't want spoilers for certain things, please turn this off. And if you don't want to hear the things I say, honestly, just turn off the video. I don't want this to impact your feelings about the game or your sentiment. I only want to share my feelings about how certain story beats, certain things impacted me, and why I went from loving this game to having very mixed feelings and opinions about the game's story and structure. So let's jump into that. As I said, this is going to be quite extensive, so buckle in. I wrote down notes. I'm going to read from those. The first two acts are fantastic. I think that Sandful did an excellent job of setting up exciting stakes, tragic philosophies and realities, and giving us a very attractive cast of core characters that each seem to have their own reasons for being on the expedition. I really enjoyed this. The problem for me occurred at the end of Act 2, with the twist. I think that it was quite jarring to me, and not in a good way. It was very much meant to be shocking, though I think that this shock value undermined a lot of the thematic elements and the premise of what I purchased. For 30 hours, I had been reinforced with certain themes and certain goals in mind, and I think they were shunted away faster than I could process what was actually occurring. Some of the pieces really did fit into place, so I don't think that it was necessarily an issue with me understanding what was going on, though I think that so many things seemed to occur at one point that it was hard for me to process all of that in a short amount of time. And by the time that I had processed it, I actively didn't agree with what the game was actually wanting me to do at that point. So I think that a lot of the game starts by focusing on community, kinship, defiance against Goliath, if we're the David in this story, survival, hope, and heroic sacrifice. And I think that some of these elements are still present when the new story, where we learn that about the painting, is brought in, but they don't have the same weight or purpose anymore. And the initial story never really properly confronts the Gamage and the themes that were presented before the rug pull into Act 3. The segue into the Act 3's tragedy, the familial tragedy, I think it nullifies the stakes set up in the opening hours with the expeditions. It's not like this new story is bad either. I think that in a vacuum, I would purchase Expedition 33 and the premise that it sets up, and I would purchase a game about a tragic family who's, living out the soul and life of their dead son through this paint. And I think that both of these are incredibly interesting, well-written, engaging and emotional stories that play to very human emotions and problems. They're very timeless in that sense, right? And I can really appreciate that. But learning that the characters and the entire world is fake removes a significant amount of my attachment to these characters, especially since the story did very little to make me feel attached to them anyway. In fact, when I learned about Renoir, the real one, and about his goals and purpose in this world, to me, he is the clear hero of the story. The story's reframing makes Mael feel like a spoiled child who is very much ready to cause even more trauma to her family by staying in the painting instead of helping her mother and family heal. This outlook of Renoir as a hero is only further cemented in the final scenes when he reveals that it was his wife who had pulled him out of a similar situation in the past and had taught him the importance of not getting too sucked into the fantasy. And again, I think that this is good. This is really, really cool. But I'm not given the choice or agency as a player when I realized this at the end of Act 2 to side with Renoir. It wasn't until the very end of the game, which itself felt quite rushed. Obviously, there's a lot of side content you can do before that, and I think that some of that content is necessary to help you process and understand what just happened. But if you understand the point of Renoir and the point of the painting, and if you think that Renoir is in the correct frame of mind, let's say, or that what he wants to accomplish is the right thing to do, then at the end of Act 2, you don't want to do any of this side content because you feel like Mael's just living out this fantasy world instead of just going back and helping her mom heal. So it's just really... It's really weird. I don't feel like I was emotionally manipulated in the right ways to agree with Mael's point of view, and instead I just openly agree with Renoir. And I do enjoy the fact that at the end of the game there is a choice to side, well, to use Verso as a way to end Mael's fantasy life in this painting. And I think that was a very well written scene. That's the ending that I chose. I do know that there is a Mael ending to this, but to me that is the bad ending. The main issue lays in the fact that at the pivotal moments of learning this, there is little confrontation of Mael's actions. Everyone just kind of seems to assume that she's in the right and Renoir's in the wrong. Of course, these are the painted versions, right? These are the fake people saying that she's in the right. But the game offers no choice until the absolute end, and until you've actively fought Renoir, which is something that I did not want to do. I would have much rather just met him and say, yes, you're right, let's go back home. This creates tremendous amounts of narrative dissonance for me, as the game is actively forcing me to press certain buttons that I don't want to press, due to them conflicting with my own desires as a player, and I haven't been thoroughly manipulated enough to want to do them. As an example of a game that I think does this a bit better is Spec Ops: The Line. Spoilers for that game too, although it's been out for a while, so I hope that most people would know about it, or would have played it if they want to. There's a mission which involves white phosphorus, which if you don't know is a very, very dangerous and I think outlawed weapon in war, which is basically unending fire. It's Amaterasu from Naruto, essentially, but in the real world, and it's very fucking scary. It sticks to your skin, it can't be put out through lack of oxygen, and it can't be put out, it burns underwater. It's horrendous. It's absolutely horrendous. In a mission in that game, in a very seemingly straightforward moment, you blindly accept orders to use white phosphorus, where you're faced with overwhelming odds and diminishing ammunition. You're about to be overrun by an enemy squad at a very key objective, and you are tasked with liberally using white phosphorus on these enemy positions. And the game is very excellent at manipulating you into thinking that this is the only thing that you have left. This is the right thing to do. And you find out immediately after this that you also burned a rather significant amount of civilians who the enemy was sheltering, and you have to walk through that aftermath, and it's very harrowing. And I'm glad that game doesn't portray this as it doesn't glorify war in any way, and this is an action that makes you question your own choices and agency within that game and within the real world, and also kind of makes you look at war in a different way too. Oops, that was almost dangerous. So why do I bring this up? In an emotionally tense and hectic moments, players and real people can do things against their better judgment without thinking things through. And I think this works quite well against the Paintress, actually. The problem is that this action, according to the narrative, and my opinion, is arguably the best outcome for the family. When you realize that killing the Paintress has doomed your world, you are immediately thrown for a loop like, are we the baddies now? And then you're taught about the backstory with the painting, and now my thoughts are, oh, so actually we did the right thing. Of course, it's going to be sad missing all these people, but they never mattered in the first place because they weren't real. And I think that for some people, they can buy into this belief that the people in the painting are real people. They have as much of a life as anyone else in the real world. The problem is that I can't. The choice to push the mother out of the painting is harsh, but I feel like it's the only way that the family can face reality and heal. So what am I saying? Act 3 just feels rushed and narratively inconsistent. It feels to me as if there were two separate stories being told, and I'm supposed to care about both. But I lost my interest in the first one thanks to the introduction of the second, to which I have little care for since most of my playtime was spent caring about the first. I feel like my emotional investment and engagement has been invalidated and not enhanced. There just isn't enough build-up to it, and the breadcrumbs aren't build-up. This is very much a Daenerys forgot about Euron Greyjoy in the Iron Forces sort of moment, if you're familiar with Game of Thrones. Suppose that there's also spoilers for Game of Thrones, but I feel like pretty much the entire world watched that, right? Similarly to the first season of the TV show Lost, I suppose also some spoilers for that show, people were sold on the marketing of a gritty island survival show, and then each season after, it kind of became more sci-fi than gritty island survival. And for a lot of people, it felt as if the entire premise of what they were sold on was shifted and not to something that they had signed up to. I don't want to go into too crazy detail, but there are just some other problems that I think upon further thought in a world that is asking me to take it very seriously and to think about it feels like some things had really, really, really well written threads that tied back to both stories, but then other things are left with massive plot holes and very little consistency between them. Renoir's actions just kind of seem illogical. He's targeting civilians in the town when he could actively gomage the expeditioners instead. You know what, I asked myself too, why didn't Deline paint proper information onto the monolith instead of numbers? Her actions directly fueled her own downfall because of the people's misunderstanding of what this number actually meant. And it's not in a very poetic way. She just didn't seem to connect the two very obvious dots. The expeditions themselves are pretty nonsensical. There's not really any strategy of Lumiere. They're just kind of throwing a bunch of bodies at the land against the grind wheel with no conviction or desire to build forward operating bases. There's no establishment of communication lines, and 95% of the expeditions just felt like it would be best to simply die wherever they, found their end instead of leaving helpful information in a very easily accessible spot. They keep repeating this line for those who come after, but the world and its characters seem to actively defy this belief at every turn. Not to mention the story just discarding with, I think, a very poignant and heavy-hitting line here for those who come after. I mean, I think that has a lot of weight to it and a lot of purpose within the initial story that's being given to me. But this kind of brings me to the characters, which I have some smaller problems with, but still some problems. Gustav, Verso, and Mael are really compelling characters, and I think every character was fantastically voice acted. The core cast of Expedition 33 is very endearing. However, Luna, Ciel, and Minoko could be removed from the story and almost nothing would change. These characters undergo no major arc, and they don't really confront their issues in a meaningful way during the core game content. their optional content, while there, is not very obvious to access. These characters, during most major story moments, don't really contribute much to the scene, especially their unique capabilities. For our team members, this is clearly a story about Gustav, Mael, and Verso, and I do think that these characters have great defining moments. The others, however, feel much closer to Kasumi or Zaid from Mass Effect 2, if you're familiar with those. They're tacked onto the main story with some writing and responses thrown in, but not necessary to experience the main game's plot points. The one good thing is that, well, I mean, the one saving grace in those is that that was DLC content, and Mass Effect 3 did bring these characters into the show quite a bit more than they were, or into the game, than they were in the second game. So it just, that was another kind of pain point I had while playing, is that they had started to build these up. They gave me really good side moments with these characters, learning about them and, you know, having some fun down-to-earth moments about who they were as a person. But any uniqueness to them it's mostly shown in the combat and nowhere else. This brings me to the combat, the last really major point that I have some problems with. And this is more of a personal critique or some game design stuff, but you know, I feel like this is less objectively problematic than the story is, where I can point to plot holes and there isn't really a great answer to some of those. Here, this is more of like personal preference. The combat to me feels very shallow. There's really, really great Pictos. The Lumina, what's the word I'm looking for? The Lumina mechanic is very well thought out, and I think that there are some really great ways to enable certain builds. We made a Suicide Squad build where we would kill characters on spawning into the combat, and they would deal damage, break damage, and burns to the enemies. It was fun. It was ridiculous. I wasn't very good at parrying, and it was kind of silly. But of course, I got better at parrying as the game went along. The problem with the shallowness is that this is a turn-based combat system inspired by JRPGs, which feels at conflict with the real-time combat dodging and parrying. I think that both of these on their own could be quite interesting to explore, and I think it was a very bold choice to put real-time parrying and dodge into the game, but it feels so overused that it kind of nullifies any strategy that you might build around the combat, the Pictos, and the Lumina. If there had just been fewer situations where this was used, or if this was, you know, most attacks couldn't be dodged or parried, but some of the really nasty ones could, I feel like then I would actually be required to build around the mechanics of the enemies. But in reality, I can just, if you're a good character or a good player, you can dodge or parry pretty much everything that occurs. However, you can't really do that because the game is very, very, very focused on giving you enemies and attacks that have massive amounts of different types of attacks and animation stalling. And for those who aren't aware, animation stalling is, I'll just demonstrate it to you. If you have an attack with a character, he comes in for a punch, moving at normal speeds, you know, that stall before the attack doesn't give you a sense of understanding of how this character is moving in an understandable, physically sensible way. You know, and every world can have its own physics, but this is just, it's a little bit too ridiculous that it just feels like you have to get hit by it or respond to it in a very, very small number of frames in order to parry or dodge it. Otherwise, you get hit. And that's not really interesting. And these hits don't really offer anything interesting beyond some effects that they might do, but it's mostly damage. So you either get good at dodging or parrying, or you build up massive amounts of defense and you just kind of tank it. It's not really strategic in my opinion. It just feels shallow. It feels like it's an overused mechanic in my opinion. The combat looks good, though. I can say this. The combat looks good. I think the camera movement is spectacular. I think that the variety of attacks, the way that you can combo certain attacks is really great. But at a certain point, the comboing doesn't really serve much of a purpose because the game is so easy to break. And while it's satisfying to break the game, I mean, if anybody's played Divinity Original Sin, you would know that there's certainly other games that are like this with turn-based combat that allow you to break the game in really crazy ways. And that's fun, up until the point where it feels like it becomes so easy to do that it nullifies any strategy that might have been there in the first place. And then in Expedition 33, you're just left with the requirement to parry, to get good at it, or to suffer through it and just kind of face tank everything that comes your way. So these are kind of the three main points of contention in the game that I had, and while I could deal with the combat because it was still visually very enjoyable, and I think that the game did offer a lot of unique ways to make builds that I could see it as something that I was engaging with as a means to an end with the story. I should mention, by the way, bosses, enemies, incredible visual design, cinematic as all hell, were just really cool attacks. There were very few bosses that I saw in the game where I was not blown away by the creativity behind them, by the just enjoyable ways that they used certain mechanics and elements and thematic aspects of the character's visual design in the attacks that they've made. And the animations as well were just absolutely fantastic. It was really just the system itself that felt very shallow compared to other JRPGs and compared to other tactical turn-based games to me. So for me, the story had some upsetting moments, and I think in the end, it failed to capture me personally in this new struggle when I was so attached to the original idea that was presented, and I felt as if the game just didn't carry through with that enough in a way that it felt like it didn't have to. It felt like this whole painting aspect and familial struggle was tacked on in a way that didn't enhance Expedition 33's core premise. In fact, it undermined it and replaced it with something that didn't feel as... I shouldn't say that it didn't feel as rewarding or as interesting. It just felt as if there were two separate interesting things, and by replacing the first one with the second one, I no longer cared about the first one. And that didn't feel very good to me. Some of the characters just felt a little bit shallow in their writing, even though I think the dialogue was largely well written, and the personalities and voice acting were really, really great. They just didn't really mean much to the story in the end. And this was specifically Luniciel and Minoko. And then I had some issues with the combat, but overall the game was still an enjoyable ride, and there was a lot of memorable moments within the story, emotional moments, and the combat was still enjoyable even though I had problems with it. So the game for me is... I don't know, I hate giving scores just because it's so multivariate. I can say this. As a narrative-driven game, largely linear with how you experience its stories, and not a whole lot of options with how to get to different endings, right? This was very much a linear RPG with a couple of different endings based on whatever choice you wanted to make. To me, the characters and the story are front and center, and combat being the main way that you interact with the world, these three elements are the most important to the game, and I felt like they each had some problems that diminished their enjoyment and ultimately meant that some of the other really fantastic elements or variety of the game are overshadowed by these problems. So for me, it's kind of between like it's really close to like a 7 out of 10, and I hate to say it because the team really did an excellent job. What I'm really glad to see is that they sold an incredible amount of sales. They, I hope, have made back their investment and even more. And I think that this team has an incredible amount of potential in the future, that if they were to make spin-offs, if they were to explore this world more or just jump into a completely new IP, I will gladly eat it up. They've done a really great job with this. And I'd even love to see a spin-off story or a DLC or something, an expansion that explores the initial Renoir and Aline painting fantasy, right? Where she was the one that pulled him out of it and helped him to cope. That seems really cool to me, and I'd love to see that. So I know that this will be controversial. I assume that some people will find this video not very great. I don't want to be a hater. I don't want to be a what's the word? What's the word for somebody who actively contradicts everything just because they want to feel special? I can't think of the word right now, but I'm not one of those people. It's just, to me, that twist was really what kind of flipped the switch for me, thinking that this game is like a 9 or 9.5 out of 10 to thinking that it's closer to a 7. And, you know, it is what it is, right? So that's my review for the game. I do hope that people enjoy it, and I know that I'm in the minority. Thank God, because Sandful Interactive did a really great job with this game. I can't wait to see more of what they make. So thank you for joining me on that, and I hope you're enjoying Expedition 33 as well. Take care, guys. Thank you for joining me on the review.